Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to start the first part of your midterm. The midterm for computer art is going to consist of 3 different parts. We'll do the first part today, the second part next class, and the third part during our actual midterm period. So the first part which we will start today will be a demonstration of how selections and layers work in Photoshop. Using different layers and creating selections of images are 2 of the most fundamental skills in Photoshop. I realized that we never had a formal lesson on using layers, but we talked about it in almost every single project that we did. So this project will be a demonstration of how important layers are when creating an image in Photoshop. The selection part we did have a formal lesson on, so this will be a bit of a reminder. Layers in Photoshop work basically like a sandwich. So for this project, you are going to create a sandwich. Sandwiches consist of multiple layers of whatever you put in your sandwich, whether it's bread or a roll, lettuce, cheese. This sandwich here has ham, tomatoes, and bacon on it as well. As you can see in my image here, I have a lot of different layers. Each element of my sandwich has its own separate layer because it's put in a specific order. If I were to move my cheese to the very top of my image, then it's going to be on top of everything. If I move it all the way down, if I move it down here, depending on what's on top of it, you will see the turkey and bacon and the last part of the bread on top. If I move this part of the bread all the way down to the bottom, then you have, again, a mixed match of layers. So the positioning of your layers in Photoshop is very important, just like when you're building a sandwich. So the first step to creating the sandwich is to open all of the elements that you will put as separate files. I have them all opened. It's not placed inside each other, they're all open. So if I'm starting with my bottom piece of bread, this will be the base layer of my sandwich. So the first thing I'm going to add is lettuce. So the way we're going to do that today is I'm going to make a selection of it. So again, we were talking about going over selections. The different tools that you have to use, your marquee tool, your elliptical tool, and your single row and single column. You could also use the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. These are all selection tools that we've covered. My favorite is the quick selection tool, so I'm going to use that. A lot of my images have white backgrounds or solid color backgrounds, which work out well with the quick selection tool. So if I click and hold with my quick selection tool and drag into my lettuce leaf here, it's only selecting the green parts of the lettuce and it's not selecting the white background. So once I have my lettuce selected, what I'm going to do is go to Edit and Copy. I'm going to go back to my bread image, and if I go to Edit and Paste, it's going to paste the lettuce piece into a new layer. So now I have a second layer here. The other ways that you can create new layers are with the actual New Layer button, which is located down here. If I press this, I will have a new layer. Or I can come up to Layer and click New and create a new layer that way as well. But since I'm copying each one of these, I'm creating a new layer every time I paste my image on top of my bread. Now I'm going to have 2 pieces of lettuce here. So another way you can create a new layer is by selecting a layer you would like to duplicate and hit Control J. It will give you a new layer, but it's a copy of whatever layer you had selected. So now I have 2 pieces of lettuce here. I'm going to resize them, so I'm going to hit Control T on my first one. I'm going to resize that a little bit. I want it to kind of fit the bread. Now if I need to see through that, I'm going to hit Enter so I can make my selection. If I want to see through that, I can hit my visible marker, and now I can see that piece. So I'm going to bring this one back in. I'm going to make sure I select that layer for my second piece of lettuce and hit Control T there. When I go up to my corner, I can rotate it, click and hold, rotate it down, and now I'm going to resize this one. So I have kind of balanced my 2 pieces of lettuce here. Hit Enter, and now I can move on to the next part. So my next part is the tomato. Again, I'm going to use my quick selection tool, select my tomato, edit, copy, or you can do Control C, come over to my bread, Control V, or edit and paste. And this one's really, really big, so I'm going to Control T this right away and resize. My tomato down, and I think I'm going to add a couple of tomatoes on here. So now if I have this one, I'm going to hit Enter or my check mark, and again Control J, select my move tool. There's tomato number 2. Oops, and Control J again, and there's tomato number 3. So now I'm done with my tomatoes. I can move on to some of the meat in my sandwich. So again, quick selection tool is the one I'm using. You can use whatever selection tool you are comfortable with. And Control C, back over to my bread. Control V adds it as a new layer. And I'm going to do Control T so I can transform it. Make it fit onto my sandwich. So really the main point of this project is so you can understand how different layers interact with each other. Enter. Now the next thing I have is some turkey. Have my quick selection tool up. Spend a little bit more time on this one, make sure I can get all those. Control C, back to my bread. Control V, again it's really big. Move it with my move tool. Control T to bring up my transformation tool. Now, if I make it too big, I start to lose some of the things underneath it. So I'm trying to find a balance where I can see all of the elements of my sandwich. I can still see some of each element beneath it. Now I might move this tomato over since it's kind of getting lost. And I can bring it up there so I can see it. Alright, so I'm done with the meat part. Now I'm on to my cheese. Quick selection tool. Control C for edit and copy. Back to my bread. Control V. Now see how my layer here, since I had my tomato selected, it put it in between the tomatoes. I'm going to move this layer all the way up so it's back on top. Control T. Resize the cheese so it fits the sandwich and I can still see things under it. And if you want to, you can rotate it so it helps you to see things better. Maybe I have my cheese completely like this. Okay, so I'm going to hit my check mark and accept that. And then I'm going to add some bacon. So I already have the selection active on here. Control C, back to my bread, Control V, and again this one's really big. Use my move tool so I can move it around. Control T or edit transform. Just so you know, edit, transform, and then scale. And I'll rotate this again. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. There's one strip of bacon, so I'll hit enter. And then I'm going to copy this layer by doing Control J. And I can move that strip over here. Or if I wanted to, I can rotate it the other way so it kind of crisscrosses. I like that better. Hit enter, and then the last thing that I have to add is my last top piece of bread. So here's my top piece of bread. Get my quick selection tool. Control C. Back to my image, Control V. Now, since I do kind of want to see a lot of the pieces underneath, I could move this up to the top here, and when I rescale it, I'm just going to make it maybe like that. So it's not super big. I can move it over a little bit because I do want to see the elements of my sandwich. So now here's all of my different layers. My completed sandwich. You can see the ones on top of each other. Everything kind of sticks out. If you wanted to, you can kind of come through and add some layer style properties like drop shadows. If I wanted to have drop shadow in my sandwich here, maybe cast just a little bit of a shadow underneath. I can change the angle. That shadow seems a little dark for a sandwich, so I'm going to change the opacity. I can change the distance and the spread and the size of it as well. You could play around with that on your own if you choose to. Another thing you can experiment with is if you do add the drop shadow, you can actually copy the layer style. So I will copy the layer style from my top piece of bread here. If I click on this layer and then I right click on my mouse, I can then paste my layer style. So I can paste the drop shadows into each layer. So if I click on layer 6 and then I right click, paste layer style, it'll add little drop shadows for each part. That's up to you if you'd like to experiment with that. So you can take all of these elements that I posted on Google Classroom for the sandwich, and you will follow along with this tutorial, and you will make your own sandwich. Again, it's a review of making selections and using layers to your advantage in Photoshop. This is part 1 of your midterm. We'll do part 2 on Thursday and part 3 the following week.